There is in our system.
So as everyone's getting settled, I would like to hand the microphone over to our City Councilman, Carlos Menchaca, to do a greeting. Please have a seat, sir. Please have, yes, and here's a little coffee mug for your cookies as well. Oh, great, thank you so much. Hello. Carlos, did you want to say a greeting?
大家好. Ni hao. Buenas tardes, and good evening, everyone. My name is Carlos Menchaca, your city council member. I'm loving the sea of community voice here. And what I want to say to you here today is that there's a real commitment from me, from the council, the city council, and your representatives that you see up here, including the CC board and the chancellor, who we keep hearing from over and over again, that the conversation that is happening today is an important one that we want to get right. And so much of what we've done as a team, as a collective team here in this district, and its roots in participatory democracy, participation from all of you, is what's driving so much. We have so much to celebrate. All the new schools that are coming, all the budget stuff that we have in our budget this year that's about to get passed tomorrow has fueled our schools. And that is just so important that you feel connected to that. But for us today, and what I want to say right now, is that there's so much work that happened to really think about middle schools and integrating them. And I want to make sure that we go back to you and the people that are not in this room today because they're working, or they felt like their language wasn't going to be spoken, or for whatever reason, that we go back to them to ensure that they are with us as we move forward to solve something that I think we all feel, that our schools need to be integrated and resourced with the things that they need to bring the best education for our kids, for our kids, for our kids. Thank you so much. And, now I want to present my colleague and the City Council partner, Brad Lander, council member from District 39.
Thank you, Carlos. Let's give it up for Carlos Menchaca, who's just been an extraordinary representative of this district. It's an honor to be in your district, Council District 38, and to share District 15. First of all, it's a real honor to be here with the Community Education Council and with our new Chancellor, and I'm especially excited to be doing it this week as we've reached a deal with Mayor de Blasio and Speaker Johnson and Education Chair Mark Traeger and Finance Chair Danny Drum on a budget that I feel deeply enthusiastic about, especially for our public schools. Together we added $125 million to the budget to raise the Fair Student Funding formula. That's going to help 800 plus schools get closer to getting 100% of their Fair Student Funding. That's a big step. We can't get all the way there without the help we need from Albany, but this was a very big step. That came because parents have been pushing and bringing their signs and organizing and demanding and not letting up. And thanks to that, more than 800 schools are going to have the resources they need in this Fair Student Funding formula that makes sure resources go especially where they're needed to help us confront the challenges schools have. Second, to the capital budget, we're adding $150 million and doing that again over the next several years to make our schools more accessible to students with disabilities. Everybody ought to clap for that, whatever you're here tonight advocating. And I want to tell you something you might have missed. That happened because a District 15 parent with a student with a disability came out to the City Council and made her voice heard. That panel was the last panel of hours of public testimony. And she and a couple other parents stuck around They were the last panel to testify, and it happened that Speaker Johnson and Chair Traeger and Chair Drum were still in the room, and were so moved by that testimony that something that had not been on the agenda, even though it's urgent and it should have been on the agenda, got heard and got put into the budget again because parents organized and pushed, and now something that needs to happen is happening, and I feel really proud of that. And one other thing, though it's not as directly for our schools, is that this new fair fares that we're putting in the budget, half-price Metro cards for $800, that those kids who are going on to go to CUNY, to go to one of our community colleges, to get a job after they graduate, are not going to have to beg for a swipe at the subway, you know, or jump the turnstile and risk winding up on Rikers as a result of being poor. So those are 3 things that your city council did together with the mayor this week that I hope everybody feels really proud of. I'm glad to be here. Just a couple of very quick thank yous before I hand it over. First, I really want to thank the CEC for District 15, a set of volunteers from across the district who work very, very hard to open all our schools up and make sure everyone can participate. Second, a big thank you to the District 15 Diversity Working Group, who have really been working hard over the last 6 months plus to open up a conversation about really hard issues. Boy, the issues of race and segregation and diversity and inclusion and schools and what we want for our kids, and how we're honest about systemic racism and its impact, how we hold what we want for our own kids, and how we show up in a generous way to have those conversations together. That is not easy. And a set of people stepped up, actually pushed back on the Department of Education and said, we need a little more room and time and inclusion in that process. And I'm not saying every step of it was perfect, but I have not previously been part of a process that made more room to have that conversation in a set of thoughtful ways. So I want to say thank you to the District 15 Diversity Working Group, to WXY, and to everybody else here who participated in one of those meetings. Thank you. And then I just want to end, I do want to say a big thank you to our superintendent who has helped us all along the way of this process. We are lucky in District 15, and I think people who disagree on a lot of other issues, who don't always see eye to eye on everything, all recognize that we are lucky to have as the educational leader of this district, Anita Skop. And Anita, thank you so much for what you brought here. And finally, just personally, I know in just the, is it even a couple of months yet? In the couple of months that he has been our new chancellor, the energy, the honest conversation, the courage and the leadership that Chancellor Carranza has shown in relationship to the council, in relationship to our schools, in relationship to our communities, is inspiring. And again, obviously not everyone agrees on all the issues, even not everyone in this room for sure, but still we are so much better off to have an educational leader who brings a big point of view, who puts it forward, who commits to leading with integrity. And the fact that you're getting out to all these districts for town hall so quickly and that you're here tonight means a great deal. Thank you very much, Chancellor Carranza.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Brown and Councilmember Menchaca. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce New York City Chancellor Richard A. Carranza.
Thank you. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank the District 15 CEC for the opportunity to be here this evening. I think there is no greater ability in our system than to hear from the community. I think it's wonderful. I have been very interested in the work that is happening in all of our CECs, but I want to give a special commendation to the work of the Diversity Subcommittee in CEC District 15 and the work that you are doing. The work that you are doing is in many ways leading the conversation in our community. The work that you are doing is in many ways not work for the timid of heart, but I want to thank you. You, with another district in our city, are also leading this conversation, which, with our district-wide diversity subcommittee, will be bringing recommendations forward to the Department of Education. And I truly believe, as I know you believe, that you cannot have a public school system without opportunities for all students in that school system. So I want to thank you for your work. I want to thank you for your leadership. And And I'm very excited to be here this evening. Look forward to answering questions.
Thank you so much. I just want, if you don't mind, I just wanted to pass the mic so that the members could introduce themselves to you. Oh, they have a mic down there. Yan Feng, why don't you start? Can you introduce yourself? Charles, can you give up?
Can you? Okay, good, it's working.
Hi, my name is Yan Feng Zhang. I am a D15 ELL.
Hi, I'm Nicole Breyer. I'm the IEP representative.
My name is Charles Starr. I'm the treasurer.
Hi, I'm Elena Romero. I've been with the CEC for 5 years.
Hi again, Neil Zeffrin, Secretary of the CEC, and I am on the working group, D15 Diversity Plan Working Group.
Hi, my name is Kathy Park Price, and I'm a co-vice president. And as one immigrant to another, I want to say thank you, Mr. Carranza, for being here, and appreciate it.
My name is Scott Powell. I'm co-vice president of CEC 15. I have 2 kids at our 2 of our community schools, PS 124 and 38.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Velez, and I am on CEC in District 15.
Welcome, Chancellor. My name is Mark Bizzard. I'm a former teacher from a family of teachers, so it's great to have you. I have a middle schooler at 839 and a 5th grader who's about ready to graduate BMS.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Antonia Ferraro. I have 3 children in District 15, and I'm also the PTA president of MS 88.
So Lily Velez was going to present to you this amazing project that we just worked on at our most recent diversity meeting.
So for those of you who are able to join us, that were in the crowd, and those who weren't, so you know, at our last CEC meeting, we held a town hall to talk about diversity, integration, and equity in our community. And what we have here is a visual representation of some of the things that folks in our community said, and they really wanted to make sure that we got it in front of you and that you had an opportunity to hear some of our stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we'll start the questions if you're ready.
Sure.
And I believe Mark Bizzard has a prepared question that he's going to ask. And
I wasn't ready for that, but yeah. Well, so since we have a packed audience, we'll start with, we had a question, some questions were submitted from the public early. We had a question about overcrowding and student-to-teacher ratio. The question was, many parents believe and research shows that to provide a quality education, students need smaller class sizes than now exist in most D15 schools. For example, 18% of our 2nd graders and 15% of our 3rd graders are in classes of 30 people or more. Class size reduction is particularly important for poorer kids and students of color, where it is one of the few school reforms that's shown to substantially narrow the achievement gap. Will you, as the Chancellor, focus on reducing class size and teacher-student ratios, especially in our neediest schools?
So that's a great question, and you're absolutely right. You know, lots of people have opinions, but when you look at the research and follow the research, there is no question that lower class sizes actually help with academic achievement. So there are 2 things that I think are really important to keep in mind. The first is that in our system, we have a decentralized system in New York City's public schools. Now again, I want to be really clear that our principals do, in many cases, heroic jobs with the funding that they get to be able to run the schools that they have. But in many cases, these are local decisions where principals have to make these tough decisions about where do I use my resources. Do I hire a teacher? Do I hire a social worker? Do I hire another teacher for class size reduction? Or do I hire a counselor? Do I invest in an after-school program? On and on, those kinds of questions. So that being said, I also want to be really clear. I've now lived in 5 different states. I've worked in 5 different large urban school systems across America. And I will tell you that as a chancellor of schools, I don't have the ability to raise the price of the product that we sell. And by that I mean, we don't sell widgets, we educate souls. And by that, I mean that the funding that we receive comes from the state of New York, and the funding also comes from the city of New York. And why that's important is that the position that we're putting principals in, I haven't met one principal yet, and I've been to almost 80 schools since I've been here. I haven't met one principal who would not like to have more resources so that they could hire additional teachers so that they could reduce class sizes in their schools. And the reason that's important is because I need and I ask all of you to join with us in making sure that the state legislature understands their responsibility, their constitutional responsibility to fund public education. And as we know, they have yet to live up to that promise that they've made to fully fund our fair student funding formula. Now, when I arrived, the average in the New York City public schools was 87%. And by that I mean that the schools were funded at 87% of what they were supposed to be funded in terms of fair student funding formula. I want to thank publicly Mayor de Blasio and our City Council, because the City Council stepped up this year and said, we're going to invest $125 million into this year's budget, which will now bring all of the schools to a minimum of 90% funding under the fair student funding formula. So we're cheering that, we're excited about that, but I have to tell you that as in a matter of weeks when I arrived in New York City and I found out I had to testify before the City Council and defend the budget. So I did a lot of studying around the budget, and one of the graphs that absolutely impacted me the most is that when you compare the funding that the state of New York is providing for public schools versus what the city of New York is providing, the city of New York has taken on much more of that responsibility, not because they need to, not because they have to, but because they see that if they hadn't stepped up, our schools would be still underfunded in terms of resources they need to do just the things that you're talking about, providing lower class sizes, providing for enrichment activities, etc. So that has to change. And what I'm going to ask you is that that conversation needs to happen in Albany, but it needs to happen here in New York City. And if we are able to have more funding, then we will be able to provide that funding to schools where they will be able to hire additional teachers to reduce class size. It is a funding issue. So I want to make sure that we keep that very, very clear, and as we support those asking for just fund what you're supposed to fund, that will help us all to reduce class sizes and actually have those enlightened practices in our school sites.
Student assessment question. There's a lot of talk about state testing and tests and how we measure our children. Many of our systems, whether it's middle school admission, high school admission, focus on test scores. We got a lot of questions and a lot of feedback from our principals when we talk to each of us. Each of us have 6 different schools we liaise with, and we ask them the question, how do you assess your kids outside that score? We get a lot of different answers. How do you envision assessing our kids outside of a single test score going forward?
So listen, I'm going to be really clear. Maybe you've heard about this before. I do not professionally or fundamentally believe that a single test is the sum total of a student's capabilities or talent. Furthermore, you don't have to take hold on. My fellow New Yorkers, with all due respect, this is a school. And there are ways of conducting ourselves in a public setting, in a school, which we will abide by in a public meeting, with all due respect. So I don't expect cheers, I don't expect boos, but I expect a good conversation. So when students, by the way, don't take my word for it, I have asked and I have continued to ask in almost my 30 years of experience, professional experience, Show me any research that says a single test is the most enlightened or best way to identify not only talent or admission or to make educationally sound decisions for students. You will find none because there exists no research. What you will find is that multiple measures are the best approach to identifying student progress, are identifying student capabilities, and making a well-informed decision about how students are doing either in a school or potentially how they will do in a program. Now, when I was superintendent in California, in San Francisco, it was during the time of No Child Left Behind. I was one of 9 school districts in the United States that banded together and we asked for district-level waivers of No Child Left Behind, which was all based on one test score. We created our own accountability system that was 60% academic achievement, and the other 40% were all of those other things that we know are important. So what was it? It was climate culture surveys. It was student feedback around instructional practices. You want to know how things are going in a school? Ask students, because they're going to tell you the straight scoop about how it's going in a school. We also included a voice for parents to give us feedback about what was happening in the school. And whereas right now, in the accountability systems that most states have, it's good to know how parents feel, it's good to know how teachers feel, it's probably good to know how students feel, but in that accountability system, that data actually counted towards assessing whether a school was doing well or not. It was approved by the United States Department of Education, it was implemented, and it gave us a much broader picture of how the health and the condition of the school was. So what I would love to have us continue to have a conversation in New York City is to move the conversation forward about how are we educating the whole child. Now I'll tell you some of the good things that I've seen. As I've traveled almost 80 schools in the first 3 months that I've been in New York City, I've seen some incredibly robust teaching. I've seen some incredible pedagogy, which is the fancy way of saying teaching in schools, where students in the same classroom with different ability levels are having their educational needs met with a variety of different strategies that the teacher, as a conductor, if you will, is masterfully facilitating in schools. I've seen students with disabilities included in a general education classroom with the appropriate supports, and they're doing incredibly well. But what I've also seen is that there are still remnants. I'm going to call it PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, from a time where in our system, teachers were evaluated based on test scores. And as a result of teachers being evaluated based on test scores, guess what? Let's be honest here. If I'm a teacher and I know that my livelihood depends on the test scores, I'm not going to teach all of those incredible lessons and the full expanse of the curriculum and give different ways of kids to learn. I'm going to make sure my kids know what's going to be tested, because what they know on the test is going to directly relate to whether I have a job. I don't think anyone here would blame someone wanting to secure their livelihood. So as we've moved away from that test-centered climate in New York City, I'm very happy to tell you that the curriculum now is expanding again. We're teaching the whole child. I'm seeing music, I'm seeing art, I'm seeing dance, I'm seeing movement of our students. We've just made a multi-million-dollar investment to train health teachers to actually have best practice aligned to standards health curriculum and strategies to teach health to our students. In some of our poorest communities in our city, we know that there are issues with health, asthma, diabetes, heart disease. And we know that if we don't teach our students not only to be academically proficient, but health proficient, long-term care for themselves, we know that our students will fall victim to some of those medical, I would say medical ills that exist in our society. So it's really looking about how do we educate the whole child, how do we create a system where data is used to tell us are students able to read and write and show mastery in the subject areas that we want, but that we use that for what data is worth, not to blame, not to shame, but to inform the instructional practices that we have in our school. that's what we will be working towards as we move forward in the coming months and years, at least under my leadership.
Is this, okay, there we go. I have two somewhat follow-up questions on the state testing and opt-out question. The first, you said a lot of, and it's a long question, so I'll just sort of cut to the chase on what you said at the end, which was, will you agree to sit with seasoned progressive District 15 teachers and administrators to review the grade 3, 4, 7, etc. 2018 tests before August 2018 because of the flaws in the tests themselves, and also review a sample of student responses and how they are scored? If no, why not? If yes, will you do so publicly? And then the second question was to ask whether you feel it would be unjust if the state forced schools to use Title I funds to increase participation in state tests if their participation drops below 95%, which I think is tied into the federal requirements for funding in the school.
Yeah, so again, I would love to meet with educators and classroom teachers that could sit, and principals. We have some very knowledgeable principals in this matter as well. To have a professional conversation about nuts and bolts, test administration, reliability and validity, and student work samples. And I would invite my instructional colleagues to sit with me and have that conversation. What I am not willing to do is sit and have a political conversation. I want to talk about education. So I publicly commit that we will do that. So I will follow up with the CEC to get at least a list of initial names. So absolutely, that makes perfect sense. And I think I want to know from the practitioners in the classroom, what does that look like and how can we get better? The second question, I'm not as sure about what is being asked.
I think what they're saying is that some schools redirect Title I money towards encouraging opt-out parents not to opt out. In other words, they're diverting money towards getting parents to take the test rather than using their right to opt out of the test, and whether you thought that it would be unjust if the state directed schools to do so.
Yeah, again, I think parents have the ability to make lots of choices. So I would be disappointed to learn of schools that are directing Title I dollars in an effort to force parents not to exercise their right. So that is not something that I would support. If asked in Albany, I would also say the same thing there. That being said, I do think that we should talk about how, there's three things. Number one, what is the appropriate role of testing writ large? Now, people will have different definitions. Let me tell you how I define a test and an assessment, because they all get rolled into one, like a big Tootsie Roll. A test is something that happens at the end of something. At the end of a unit, at the end of a chapter, at the end of a semester, at the end of the school year. Typically a test is an autopsy. There's nothing you can do. You've done it. What I am not in favor of is expanding the number of tests in our school. I don't think that you need a testing culture to actually know how students are mastering content and curriculum. What I am 110% in favor of is increasing the physical exam, which we call assessments. Assessments happen every single day in the hands of very qualified teachers. They assessed multiple times during their class period. They ask certain questions. They ask students to demonstrate things. They may even give a quick 3-question assessment to gauge, do my students know what we've just studied? Who is already beyond? Who still needs more help? That way I determine who I spend time with, who can go on to the next. Assessment is in real time. It's a physical exam. I think we should be doing assessment all day long, because that gives teachers actionable data to be able to affect what is being taught, how it's being taught, and what comes next. But unfortunately, when I talk about we need to have an enlightened conversation about it, all of that gets commingled and thrown into the same bag, and we say we just want to be about testing. So again, I respect parents' rights. I don't encourage parents not to have their students tested, only because let's make it better. But it's important for us to also know how our students doing. That's important data for us to have, and important data for us to be able to act upon as well. So again, I would not discourage parents actively by using Title I money or using that as any kind of a hammer to get parents not to exercise their right. I think we have to do a better job of explaining why it's important to know where students are, what they're doing. And apropos to the first question that I was asked, I'm willing to sit with educators and actually look at those particular points of pedagogy and testing and tests to identify how we can make them better.
Okay, the next, I just want to point out to there were 15 people who asked questions on this topic. I just want to let you know that we will get all of the cards and all of the questions in their details with your contact information to the Chancellor, but I am not going to read 15 straight questions all on Success Academy, though they can be roughly one asks that you address it, why they can't occupy an empty space, why the decision came so late, what the plan is, whether you would support the opening, I'm just trying to get through them so I'm not asking the same question twice. Where are the kids going to go? Why is the city going back on its obligation? Can you use your authority to open Success Academy Lafayette? Anyway, the 15 questions roughly ask the same thing. Your reaction to the recent action with regards to Success Academy Lafayette.
Listen, I really appreciate it. Thank you. Everybody that has their signs, I see you. You're well represented. Thank you. I don't want your arms to get tired. So, let me address this with a little bit of context setting and why this is important. I spent last week some significant time in one of the Success Academy schools. I had the opportunity to not only see students in school, I had an opportunity to speak with some teachers. Obviously, I had an opportunity to speak to the leadership. But what really just struck my heart was when I had a conversation with the parents. And the parents were so incredibly passionate about why they made a decision. They chose where their students were going to go. They were articulate, they were passionate, they were fantastic. And I really enjoyed my time at Success Academy. Since then, there's been this issue around a space issue. And let me just be really clear about where we are with that. Part of what I've heard is that there were a secret agreement and there were promises made. Let me be really clear. I've been on the job since April 2nd. There will never be secret anything when it comes to either space or agreements about how we're going to support each other. So whatever existed prior to Chancellor Carranza will not exist going forward, because I don't play that game. But I will tell you this. If the decision was made to close PS 25, and the decision was approved by the PEP, the PEP. Subsequent to that decision to close PS 25, we were sued as a DOE. And we were sued and a request was made to halt the closure of PS 25. That lawsuit was heard in court and the judge issued an injunction preventing us from closing PS 25. Part of that injunction also stated that we could not change what's happening at PS 25. In essence, we freeze what's happened at PS 25. Now, I understand that, and that this concern has been brought forward to me. that what about the 70 middle schools of Success Academy that need a school in Brooklyn, right? That need a school and space in Brooklyn. And I've been asked to exercise emergency authority or to just open up those 70 seats at the PS 25 building, which is enjoined by the courts from us moving forward. I have very good news for everyone from from Success Academy this evening. We have found for you almost 2,000 seats. So you may want to write this down. Right now, Bed-Stuy Middle School, which is a Success Academy middle school, has 660 available seats. Myrtle Middle School, which is only 0.8 miles from K25, has 390 vacant available seats. Ditmas Park Middle School, a little farther, 3.6 miles, but still in Brooklyn, has 870 vacant seats available for those 70 middle school students. And East Flatbush Middle School has 1,020 available middle school seats right now in Brooklyn. So we have over 2,000 seats available tomorrow for the 70 middle school students in Success Academy. This is really good news for all of us. Our staff will continue to work with Success Academy to identify where the best location is. And then as we move through this court injunction, we will continue to have conversations about what those seats will look like in the future.
Thank you so much. I also am looking around the audience and seeing a lot of confused people. Yes, this story is not about District 15, but thank you for all of that really great information.
Sure.
The District 15 integration process has completely failed to include representatives from the community for students with disabilities. They are not in the working group, and the advisors meant to represent them have never been appointed, nor were they invited to working group meetings, nor were they part of creating the plan. Some New York City disability groups were given a plan to comment on with very little notice and do not want to be official advisors because their communities and themselves fail to be included. We want integration for all. District 15,
District 75.
D75.
75.
I'm not sure what CSD programs are, but I also saw IEP and ADA. Maybe, I assume you know what CSD programs are. And then a second question, which I think is along the same lines, which is why don't we have schools that run with the same access as public schools, pre-K through high school? But that question is a little ambiguous. But
okay, that's a mouthful, but let me see if I can answer. So this is going to be just a little bit longer, but I think it's important to give context. So everywhere that I have served, including in New York City, I have found that one of the first questions that I have asked is, how are we including, not in the literal sense in classrooms, although that's important, but how are we including in conversations around policy, conversations around strategy, all stakeholders. That includes our students with disabilities and those that are guardians or parents of our students with disabilities. One of the things that I started my comments this evening is giving great kudos to District 15 and the Diversity Task Force. I mean that. You have in many respects gone first with very difficult, in some places people would consider it intractable issues that you've taken on. You've had a robust engagement process in many ways, but we also understand that there is a need to continuously go back and say, who have we not talked to? Who have we not included? And one of the things that I had an opportunity to meet with the Diversity Task Force before this meeting, and one of the things they themselves said to me was they are in the process of doing just that, going back and bringing people into the conversation. So I'm very excited about what will be happening right here in District 15 as we go forward. That being said, we have a reckoning to come to in New York City in terms of how we look at students with disabilities. And let me tell you what that means. there is absolutely a need to identify, do we believe that special education is a program? Or do we believe that special education is a service? And let me tell you why it's important, because it may seem a little esoteric. But it's important because if we believe that special education is a service, that means that we as a system can send those kids, quote unquote, those special ed kids somewhere. They go somewhere with teachers that serve them in a school where they go. And what ends up happening is that's the definition of segregation. So we will never believe in a programmatic approach to special education. However, there are glimmers of programmatic approaches all over the system. I'm being honest with you. So what we're going to work towards is a service delivery model. Special education is a service. And that service is provided to the student depending on their disability or their classification in the least restrictive environment, which is always in the general education classroom first. Now, let me tell you why that's important. That's important because if you're going to provide the service in the least restrictive environment, and that least restrictive environment is usually or always in the general education classroom, then what that means is that students with disabilities have, I would say, an instruction manual that comes with them. It's called the IEP, the Individual Education Plan. And when they come to that general education classroom with their individual education plan, their IEP, it tells the teacher or teachers how, why, and how long you provide these kinds of interventions in a general education classroom. But it also means that there aren't certain schools that only will take students with disabilities and other schools that they won't go to. It also means that you open opportunities to all students, including specialized schools, with students with disabilities, because they have a right to go to every school in the public school portfolio. And there are challenges with that that I will talk about, not the least of which is the instructional challenge, which I've just laid out, but there are also challenges in terms of the physical challenges. I would say that in New York City we have, and I'm going to be very diplomatic, we have a historic portfolio of buildings. That's a diplomatic way of saying we have some old buildings. And not all of those old buildings are ADA accessible. Not all of those old buildings are accessible to all students with disabilities. Thank goodness we have a city council and a mayor who see an enlightened approach and just added hundreds of millions of dollars to help us start chipping away at those facilities access issues. Now, the one last thing, because this is an important topic, I'm sorry for filibustering this, but this is an important topic. The other thing that we have to pay attention to in terms of students with disabilities is that it's been my experience that other students get commingled and get put into that programmatic approach of special education and get sent to a program. Let me give you an example. Students that are English language learners, it is not uncommon that because students are English language learners, they're learning English, that gets masked for needing special education services, and they get referred to special education, and then I don't know how, but they get an IEP, and all of a sudden they're on the road to segregation. So we need to be very clear about how we're identifying students for special education services, what the process is for identifying whether they need special education services, and the most critical component of all is that every parent should know their rights in terms of what they can do and demand for their students with disabilities, and every IEP, every process, every document should be in the home language of that parent. So if the parent speaks Swahili, it should be in Swahili. If the parent speaks Spanish, vale más que ese documento sea en español. That's part of the fundamental rights that parents have in terms of making informed decisions for their students with disability.
So that, what you said at the end actually led into the next question I was going to ask anyway, because a parent asked, what will you do to support English language learners who are inappropriately labeled as special needs? And more specifically, since you addressed that, what will you do to ensure that English language learners are receiving the mandated services, and what accountability will be put in place for leadership to ensure compliance with L regulations?
Yeah, so I've already started to engage in a comprehensive review of all of our departments and all of our initiatives, including our English Language Learner Division, our Special Education Division, our Teaching and Learning Division, you name it. I'm kind of looking under the hood and understanding why is it that we do what we do and how can we do it better. That being said, we have some guidance from the state of New York around certain things that we have to improve in terms of our delivery methodology for students with disabilities, but also students that are English language learners.
Mark or Lily, do you want to do the next question?
Yeah, so we are looking at that right now.
I don't have a hot mic. Oh, I do have a hot mic. There's quite a few questions about what the DOE is going to do about integration in our schools, and I think you spoke already a little bit to this idea of segregated classrooms and the creation of schools within schools. Many of the factors that people questioned were stemming from either IEPs or GNT programs. So the question is, what is the DOE going to do to actually deal with putting integration into our schools that is anti-racist and is really about making our schools integrated in more than just words?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we've already invested a tremendous amount of not only focused resources, but also programmatic resources. The Universal Pre-K for All is, believe it or not, it's an instructional strategy. It's a parent empowerment strategy, but most people don't realize it's also an integration strategy. Because as parents and members of the community get an opportunity to explore schools, that word on the street is you don't want to go to that school. You have never stepped into that school. Amazing things happen when people go into schools that other people tell them don't go, and then all of a sudden you go and you figure, wow, great stuff happening in these schools. So that is a tangible effort. We've also secured millions of dollars in this budget where we are doing anti-bias, implicit bias training for adults. I'm going to tell you right now, we're looking at starting that work within anywhere from 8 to 12 districts in the school district. We're going to train not only central office administrators, but we're also going to train principals, we're going to train teachers, we're going to train support staff, and that is powerful work that is really important to creating conditions and environments where all students are not only accepted but supported. The other work that we're doing is a directive I've given to our teaching and learning and our curriculum and instruction department is to start looking at all of our curricula and materials through a culturally relevant perspective and lens, so that it's important that as we think about what our students are learning and being taught, that they're seeing the full kaleidoscope, the full mosaic of America, which is a land of immigrants, so that they see that in their classrooms. I visited 2 schools today where students were able to tell me about Jim Crow laws and how those Jim Crow laws affected different groups in their own classroom of different ethnic groups, and were beautifully able to tell me why that was important. That's the kind of higher order thinking that we want to make sure is imbued in all of our school communities and all of our schools, all of our classrooms. That's really, really important. And then the other thing that I think is really important, and again, I started my comments this evening acknowledging this, is that if you're going to, my experience has been, by the way, if anybody tells you they've solved the integration problem, they've solved the eliminating segregation problem, don't buy anything from them, because nobody has solved it. Because I'm going to give you 3 numbers. I'm going to give you a math problem. Are you ready? 3 numbers. 64, 10, 17. Students, you already know the answers. Okay? 64, 10, 17. Let me tell you why these numbers are important to all of us as it pertains to integration of schools. 64 years ago, the highest court in this land, the United States Supreme Court, unequivocally, definitively ruled that separate but equal is not acceptable, especially as it pertains to public school education. In their landmark Brown versus Board of Education decision, 64 years ago, that became the law of the land. And here we are 64 years later, where we look at every conceivable data point, every piece of evidence indicates that not only have we not lived up to the law of the land, we have in many cases failed to even start the implementation. So the work that District 15 is doing, and who is and who hasn't and who agrees and who doesn't, that is important, but that's not the point. The fact that you're having the conversation and the convenings and the critical conversations are really important. But 64 years ago, the law of the land was very clear. We have yet to integrate our schools. And if you want to talk about data, show me data that says segregating students is an effective practice for increasing academic achievement for all public school students. There is none. Yet there is a growing body of knowledge and literature, data, that shows that integrated schools not only lifts some, it lifts all. It's a good practice. So I think 64 is important because we have to live up to what the Supreme Court says. I know you're wondering, what's 10? 64, 10. I don't know if you remember where you were 10 years ago, but I still remember, I will never forget till the day I die where I was 10 years ago. And I will remember because 10 years ago, this country elected the first black president of the United States of America. 10 years ago. And we were jubilant. And we celebrated. And many of us said we are finally in a post-racial society where we have elected a black president despite our history. Despite all of those issues with race that we have fought, we elected a black president, and over his 2 terms, I will tell you whether you agree with his politics or not, I don't really care. But he represented us as a president with dignity, with class. He was acerbic, he was diplomatic, he was well-spoken. In times of tragedy, he healed us with his words. In times of being tough, he motivated with his actions. He was my president. For many of you, he was your president. But it lulled us into a false sense that we had reached a post-racial utopia in America, and we had gotten there. Martin Luther King had said it. We had reached the mountaintop. We were all looking over the mountaintop, and we had a black president, so we were comfortable. 64 minus 10 gets you 17. And the 17 that I'm talking about, the 17 that I'm talking about are the 17 months post our last president and the current administration, where, again, I really don't care what your politics are, but let's look at the facts. There is an environment in our nation where it's okay to say racist things. It's okay in this 17 months for parents, many who, and by the way, immigrant parents who are here this evening, thank you. Because I have no doubt that you feel safe in this school, but I know that you don't feel safe getting here or getting home because of who will stop you or who will ask you or what could happen. So thank you in spite of that for still being here. But in those 17 months, the mere act of supporting your family by delivering pizza can get you detained and put on a path to deportation. We are America. We are a land of immigrants. And the irony is not lost that while we look across the bay and we see the Statue of Liberty, we are not living up to those ideals. So don't forget 64, 10, and 17, and on July 1st it becomes 18. And why is that important? Because when you think about it in the context of who we are as a nation, where we educate all children, we don't segregate out kids and say, some of you are going to get an education, some of you we need street sweepers. Because we believe we educate all students. It's a big deal in the world. Not all countries around the world educate all students. We do. So the conversation about segregation is not divisive. It cannot be divisive because the conversation around integration is American. It should be American. That's why the work that you're doing is so incredibly important. So around the work that you're doing in District 15, but around the work that we're going to do writ large in the entire school system, we've only just begun.
Thank you so much. I just want to make a note that we're getting close to the end, and so we're going to take one more question, but I also heard that there are at least 30 people still out in the hall, and I'd like to invite them in if we could, so that they could at least have an opportunity to hear the last question. Could we have the safety agents allow them to enter, please?
Okay, so seeing as we are on time, I'm going to begin with the last question and sort of piggybacking on what you just spoke about. The question is, from both sides of this conversation, what is the purpose of having specialized high schools? And then what do you aim to achieve by changing the aptitude test requirement and changing these schools now? Folks want to know why not focus on K through 8 instead.
So thank you for the question. So we are focusing on K through 8 education. Actually, we're not focusing just on K through 8. Incredible resources have been invested in improving renewal schools. And despite what armchair quarterbacks will say about whether it was successful or not, look, I've spent time now talking to principals in renewal schools, teachers in renewal schools, and parents in renewal schools. They couldn't be happier in general with what resources they received and the support that they received to get better. And we've had schools that have improved, so they're no longer renewal schools, they're in the rise, they're doing better. So we have invested lots of time, lots of resources before I ever got to New York City around improving the system as a whole. So anyone that says just improve the K-8 schools haven't looked at the facts. I'm sorry, happy to show you what those facts are. Now, the issue of specialized schools, let me be really clear. I think that a community that says we want some specialized opportunities for students in our community, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that there's a role for those kinds of schools. But I also think they're not for everybody. I will tell you, I've also spoken to parents where students have been admitted to specialized programs and they said, no, I'm not going to go there, I'm going to go somewhere else because I really think that's a better fit for me. That's a good thing. That is a really good thing. So I think there's a role for specialized areas of study, specialized schools. What I think, though, is when you have a specialized school, you have to be very, very careful about how you're casting your net to identify students that are eligible to go to those schools. And I think you have to, in a public, I'm going to underline again in the air, public schools, there's no question, sir, it's my time. In a public school, you must, because they belong to the public, they don't belong to me. So that means that in a public school system, there has to be as wide an opportunity as possible for students to have an opportunity, not forcing them, an opportunity to get admitted to those schools. Now let me give you some facts. Let me give you some facts. We're not going to do this. Let me give you some facts. So there is no data. There is no data that shows a single test for admission to a specialized program is the best way to identify student talent. There is none. If you think there is, show it to me. But we have lots of data, because people want to talk about data, lots of data that shows that a multivariate way, a multi-dimensional way of identifying student talent is not only the better way. Every university that is an elite university. Today, if we went and applied to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, UCLA, USC, you name any elite university in the United States, you will not take a single test to get admitted. In fact, you won't be admitted. It's multi-dimensional in terms of how they admit students. I will also give you another data point. When you have in the city of New York City,
I went to Stanford.
So, I'm sorry, I was raised that when people are talking, you don't interrupt them. So I'm not going to allow you to do that. I was asked a question that came from the audience. I'm going to provide you the answer. Please show respect in an educational environment where you respect people's ability to speak. So let me be even more clear. There are 165 specialized high schools in the United States. 165. We only have 9. We have the 8 where there's a test, and then you have 9 where you have an audition process, LaGuardia. So there are 165 specialized schools in the United States. New York City is the only city in America where there is a single test for admission to a specialized school. So either the rest of the country's wrong and we're right, or other people have figured out that in a public school system, there are ways to identify how students can actually be identified for an opportunity, not a forced placement, to go to these schools. Third thing I want to make sure is really clear, then I gotta go. The third thing that I think is really important for us to understand is that currently in our specialized schools, 50% of the seats are provided by 21 middle schools in a city that has almost 600 middle schools. So that means that unfortunately many of our parents have been sold a bill of goods. You've been told that in order to go to one of these schools, you have to go to certain middle schools. And yet, with what the proposal on the floor is, if you are a high-achieving student, if you do the very thing that students that want to go to specialized schools already do, they go to school every day, they study hard, they do well on their classes, they are involved, you will now have a broader opportunity of having an opportunity to go to a specialized school. And our parents, many of whom are poor, don't have to spend thousands of dollars on test prep for one test. I think that's unjust. I think there's no room for that in a public school system. And I also think there is a more enlightened way, sorry I have to talk louder, but I want to make sure you hear me. There's a more enlightened way to identify the beautiful capacity in our city. So this is a conversation I'm already inviting different communities to have. And I will continue to have this conversation. The proposal is on the table, and I look forward to us as New Yorkers having this very important conversation. Are they for everyone? And I think they are. Yes. Thank you so much for your opportunity this evening.
Thank you, Chancellor Carranza. We're really excited to have you in Brooklyn tonight, and thank you for all of the fantastic work you've done for us so far in these 2 months. Really looking forward to working with you in the